On this episode of the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show, Lawyer Up with Michael Lafayette of Lafayette, Ayers & Whitlock, and now to the show.
Welcome to the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show, where we bring you insights into the local Central Virginia real estate market, go in depth to answer your real estate questions and concerns, and interview local figures and influencers in the greater Richmond area. And now, let's get to the latest episode with your host, Chris Elliott, and co-host, Maddie Ray.
Welcome to another episode of the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show. Super excited to have Mr. Mike Lafayette to the show today. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing great, thanks, Chris. How about you?
Doing well. Doing better than yesterday, right?
Yep, doing better than yesterday, yep. A little under the weather.
So Michael is a real estate attorney with Lafayette, Ayers & Whitlock. We're going to be asking him all things legal advice today. So Mike, what we're going to do is you're just going to run through a series of questions that we had kind of put together for you, if that sounds good to you.
That sounds great.
And I'm going to give a little precursor. So you're coming off of some allergy issues. So if the voice is a little scratchy,
right, not my normal voice, but
yeah.
we'll pull through it.
And it's not the coronavirus.
It is not the coronavirus. No,
okay.
Thank goodness. I have not traveled abroad, so we're good.
But you're doped up on some good medicine.
I am.
We're going to get
all legal though. We're good.
Yeah, all access today with Michael Lafayette. All right, Mike. So before we kind of jump into the meat, we always like to take it a step back. Tell me, how'd you get into practicing real estate law? What was the genesis? How'd you pick real estate law over other law, avenues? Tell me the story.
Yeah, so I've been practicing law 30 years, and so when I first started, I worked in litigation. I thought I wanted to work at a big firm and do litigation and do those kinds of things. And then when you get into it, litigation really isn't fun. You're in court, or you're actually writing briefs, you're doing all kinds of things, and it was just not what I wanted to do.
Sure.
So I actually left a very large law firm that had 404 attorneys, and then joined a small firm that was 3 attorneys. I made the 4th attorney, so and totally changed my practice, and that really is to real estate and business transactions and related areas, and that's where I started, and that was 28 years ago, and I've been doing real estate ever since.
Nice. What kind of litigation, out of curiosity?
It was large, complex litigation. So it's where you have like a dozen attorneys suing another firm or another company on behalf of a corporation, and maybe they have a dozen attorneys. And so it was research, and it was all kinds of cases that were very complex. And so not really actually a lot of courtroom time, just more research and analytical. To me, it just wasn't fun. I'm much more of a people person, and I love the transactional nature of real estate, and so it really fit me. So litigation did not. I thought it would, but it did not. So
yeah, okay. Probably hard to waking up every day arguing.
Yeah, well, and people think litigation is what they see on TV. You go into a courtroom and you make these great arguments, but litigation is much more preparation. It's probably 90 or 95% preparation, and 5% able to talk with a client or go to a courtroom. And that preparation is really boring, to be honest. It's just
dry.
Very boring, very dry. Yeah. So not a lot of fun.
Okay. And you kind of touched on it, but what kind of attracted you to real estate per se?
So I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. After I left litigation, I thought I did want to go to a smaller firm, and I thought that transactional work, which is what we call, real estate closings or business closings, would be something of interest, because I think I have a business background. My undergrad was a business major, so between that and thinking I would like to do something that was more client related. So I thought that real estate and business transactional work would be a good fit, and it was, from the first day forward, it was a great fit.
Super cool. Okay. Well, we're glad to have you in the space.
Great, thanks.
So tell me, Mike, let's start here. What does a closing agent do? Whether it's a title company or an attorney, what is kind of their role in the process of a real estate transaction for somebody that maybe hasn't gone through that experience before, or just doesn't really know what their closing agent did at the time? And
that's a great question. Most of what a closing agent does, is behind the scenes. People come to a closing and they say, they sit down with you and they sign the documents, and they think, oh, well, this is pretty easy. All you did was assemble documents. And actually, that's just the last part of it. But the real process begins once the contract is signed. And of course, we receive that from the client or from the real estate agent. And from that, a lot of things have to fall in place for a closing to be successful. First thing is we order a title search, and we look at the results of the title search, make sure there's no liens or judgments or any issues, and in a lot of closings there are. We talk with the lender, get all the lender documents, put those in place, and then work through all the contract terms that need to be worked out. Sometimes it's early possession, sometimes there's just defects, then there's repairs, it's getting invoices. So it's really putting everything together. Probably the biggest chunk of time is actually coordinating with the lender, if there's a lender involved, and most closings do have lenders.
Sure.
Making sure that all the documents, making sure that the numbers balance, because it's pulling a lot of different figures. Courthouse figures from recording the deed and mortgage to the lender fees to the title fees, and making sure everything is correct. So there's a lot of paperwork that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so once all that is coordinated, then you get to the closing part. So that's kind of just a brief summary. And whether you're a closing agent, as in a title company doing closings, or an attorney, all that has to be assembled.
Sure. Okay. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's your job, it's the closing agent's job really to assemble all those numbers, send them off to the lender approves, and then you guys execute the closing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, in some respects, the lender actually sends us figures also, and we compare. So we really match up and we compare numbers. So we get instructions from a lender of what their expenses would be for a closing for a particular client. And then based on that, we prepare something called a settlement statement. Settlement statement will have all the cost. Then we also have to get numbers like for the title search, the title policy, if there's any contract terms, for instance, like if there's a seller credit or anything like that that has to be adjusted. So those figures also go on the settlement statement, and we would provide that also to the lender. So that is all put together, and then ultimately you get to a bottom line number of what it takes to come to closing, and that's what we provide to the client.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a very well explained segment there. So what would you say, in your opinion, are the differences between a closing, a title company and a closing attorney? Because that's a question that we get a lot. I mean, we always recommend clients use attorneys, and in Virginia you can go either way. Attorneys tend to cost a little bit more, but I think it's money well spent. So what are those differences that people should know?
Okay, so first of all, with a title company, there has to be a title company involved, or should be involved in every closing. And the purpose of the title company, first of all, is to do a title search and to issue a title policy.
I'm going to take it one step back. What is a title search, just for somebody out there?
Yeah, so a title search is, in Virginia, records of deeds and anything related to real estate are kept at the courthouse. And the courthouse search there, those are called deed books. They keep everything with respect to that property, prior deeds, if you have a mortgage, anything like that. So a title search is actually going to the courthouse, or some courthouses are online. You can do it electronically if you pay for access. And you search the title. In other words, you search the ownership. And you see if there's anything in the ownership, in the chain of ownership, that is an issue. For instance, is a deed that hasn't been signed correctly? Is there a judgment or a lien? For instance, a prior owner didn't pay their credit card bill, and that credit card company put a lien against a property. That's the biggest thing we see. We see a lot of liens or judgments, things like that.
Yeah.
And so when you're buying a property, you want to make sure it's what we call free and clear, so that there is no judgments, no liens, no problems related to that problem, that property. So therefore, that's why a title search is needed. So you get the title search done by the title company, and they give us a report. So a title search is kind of like a report that says, here's who owns the property, here's their names, here's the information about it, here's the prior deed into them, and oh, by the way, here are some issues related to the property. And on most title searches, there are some issues. There's judgments or liens or mortgages that have to be paid off. So we go through that title search, and we make sure that we take care of those items, or to make sure they're addressed. And if it's something where it is like a judgment or a lien, sometimes those are controversial, or sometimes those are just takes more time because you have an owner who maybe is disputing the judgment or the lien, and it can take time to clear.
Sure.
Sometimes what comes up is a mortgage that someone paid off years ago, but the bank never released it. The bank went under and never released the mortgage, and there's a process we have to go through to get that release. So that's what a title search is. And then from that title search, by the way, that's what you get a title policy. And what a title policy does is it ensures the owner, the buyer of the property, that they have good title, and that if the title company missed anything or something comes up related to the property, prior to their purchase that they're covered. And so the title company would be on the hook for any claim that could come up. So for instance, if a prior owner had a judgment or lien and that was not found by the title search, then the title company would still be responsible for paying that off because the buyer paid good money for that title policy.
Sure.
That title policy ensures that they have good title. Well, they don't, so therefore the title company is on the hook and would have to pay that claim.
Yeah.
And things do come up from time to time, not just judgments, but it can also be people actually, there are fraudulent deeds out there. There's a lot of things that people can do in the public domain that can affect real estate.
Sure.
And the title company or the title policy ensures all that. So that's why you should always get a title policy.
Yeah.
All right. So, but going back on there, so the title search and the title policy is something that has to happen in every closing. So there should always be a title company involved in a transaction. The question, though, is who then does the closing? And there is a difference. So the title company can get licensed in Virginia to be a settlement agent. Okay.
Called a layman settlement
A
agent?
lay settlement,
Yep.
right? A lay settlement, right? And so they could be a settlement agent. And so what that is a non-attorney closing. So it's basically people who have experience to do closings, but non-attorney. And what that means is they can't give legal advice. So if an issue comes up, you can't get advice from the title company because they're not an attorney, and they're not allowed to give advice because they're not an attorney. Plus, they're not trained to give answers to those things. So the difference between a title company and an attorney for a closing is that there's an attorney involved in an attorney closing that can answer questions, can give legal advice, and has that experience to guide a client through. And when you have the attorney and with the staff, it is going to cost more. You know, it is clearly going to cost more to have an attorney on your side to be looking at things and giving you advice. And I tell people they have to make that business decision. So even sitting here today, I would never tell a client never to use a title company for a settlement agent. That's their choice. So they try to save a couple $100. And if they want to use the title company, that's absolutely fine for the settlement. But the problem is, no one's looking out for their interest. No one's advising them because a title company can't. So you kind of trade off on, okay, I can save a few $100, but then I have no representation and no one advocating for me. Because a settlement agent that's a title company is not an advocate. They are just a mechanical closing, sign here, but there's no one advocating, no one looking at the contract to review terms or explain things, or to explain the title documents, or to explain the loan documents. And so, that's the big difference. And it's only usually a few $100 difference, so it's a big difference for a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm an attorney, and I think attorneys do a great job in closings, and I take my time to explain everything, and most attorneys do.
Yep.
And I think it's well worth the money that someone has an attorney looking out for their interests and advocating for them. But that is the difference. And in Virginia, you can either use an attorney or a lay settlement agent, which is a title company, and it's certainly the consumer's choice.
Yeah, and it might not be the best explanation, but we usually tell people, like, it's an insurance policy. So if everything goes according to plan, then both an attorney and a title company is just kind of facilitator of the closing. But it's when stuff hits the fan that you're really glad that you have that attorney in your corner versus having a title company, which they can kind of tell you what they think should happen, but they can't really give you, like you said, legal advice.
Yeah, and there's some good title companies out there that do closings. So I'm certainly not here to knock any of the title companies that do settlements or closings. They're good folks too, but it is just restrained by law. They're restrained on what they can do. They're not trained to answer questions, and they can't by law answer questions when it comes to legal interpretation or legal opinions or what anything means in the documents. So I would say it's a little bit more than insurance. It's also understanding what you're getting into, and settlement agents really cannot explain that. They can tell you to sign here. They can facilitate. That's a great word. They can facilitate the closing. They can gather the documents. They can print out the documents, but they really can't explain them to you. So it's insurance, but also a little more of an explanation. So even if there's no problems, you still get at least an explanation of what you're signing. And then I'll tell you, it seems to me that since I started doing closings 28 years ago to where I am now, most transactions have problems. It just seems to be a more assertive or aggressive nature of people nowadays in transactions, and it just happens to be that there's more issues that seem to come up, I think.
So back in the day, everybody was just sunshine and butterflies and shaking hands. And
Hey, when I first started doing closings, talk about age, that was 28 years ago. The contract was one page, and it was printed on the front and back, and you tear it off. And now the Realtor contract is 9 pages. So it's just different.
yeah.
things happen, things evolve, and like I said, I'll just say politely that people are more assertive in their positions.
That's such a polite way to say that. Very cool. Okay, so let me ask you. So, what are some of those instances? Give me examples, because people always ask us, and sometimes, we don't know exactly what to say. But what are some of those instances where situations that you've seen where folks get into a situation? Maybe they're using you, and you're like, man, I'm glad they're using us because the title company wouldn't be able to assist them. Or maybe sometimes they come to you after the fact where they realize they're pretty far up the creek without a paddle because they went with the title company. Give me some examples if you can.
Yeah, I'd say the classic example with that is someone has signed the contract. They're going through the transaction. They have property inspections done. They come up with a repair request, and that's being negotiated between the realtors. And then something goes wrong, and I'll get a phone call saying, "I'm not sure I want to go through with the transaction." If it's a title company doing a settlement, they immediately have to say, sorry, I can't discuss that with you. I cannot give you any opinion or advice with respect to the contract. You're on your own.
Yeah.
And so when I get the phone call, my response is, okay, tell me what your concerns are, and let's walk through the contract, and let's just see what your rights or obligations are, and try to walk a client through. Oftentimes we get the contract through, or get the client to understand the contract better, and they then feel like, okay, I'm on the right path. Sometimes they're like, oh, we didn't realize we're the ones at fault. Or other times they're like, well, we didn't realize we actually had these rights, the different things that we could do. And it's also no disrespect to the real estate agents involved. Some of these things can be pretty technical on the legal side of things. And I tell real estate agents all the time, if it's a legal issue, you should really refer it to the attorney, because let the attorney advise, because on a legal issue, because you don't want to get burned. Real estate agents shouldn't be giving legal advice. The attorney should be. Yeah, and the lawyer shouldn't play real estate agent.
Sure.
So real estate agents should, I rely on the real estate agents that I partner with all the time to make sure, they're telling the clients when it comes to pricing and repairs and all those kinds of things. So I don't try to play real estate agent, but again, real estate agent shouldn't play attorney either.
Sure.
So that comes up a lot. People ask me. I'd have to say it comes up several times a month for me in the transactions we do. Several transactions a month where people say, "What are my rights under the contract?" And with the title company, they can't ask. Well, they can ask the question, they won't get an answer. Another thing that comes up sometimes is having an issue with the lender, and they're like, "What are my rights with respect to this lender," or anything like that. And then lastly, it's the title.
Give me some examples on the lender, because I've never heard that.
Yeah, so sometimes they'll say, "Hey, I have this. I don't know what to do. The lender has explained to me the different options available. Should I get PMI, mortgage insurance premium or not? Should I put 20% down or not?" They've kind of explained things, but what does that mean to me on the practical side? Or the lender has said they can do a first and a second. What does a first and a second really mean? They explained it to me, but I don't get it. Well, it means it's a first mortgage and a second mortgage, so you're actually taking two loans. So I'll have clients that will call me, just not that the lender hasn't explained it, but they don't understand, and lenders are busy like everyone else, and sometimes they don't do a great job of explaining. Again, not trying to put anyone out, but so I'll get calls like that. Probably, though, the second category, I probably get fewer calls on the lender side. Probably the number two, now that I think about it, is really on the title. There's a title issue, and we call the client and say, "Hey, listen, the seller has an issue on title," and they're like, "What does that mean?" And then we have to sit down and explain what it means, or talk on the phone, and explain what it means. It means, okay, there's a judgment or lien that has to be removed, because I don't want you buying a piece of property that has a judgment or lien from a prior owner. And I go through and explain the process, what that means. I mean, basically, you're inheriting someone else's problem if you want to go to closing. And then once I explain all that to them, they understand, a buyer will understand and say, okay, you're looking out for me. I understand why closing is delayed. Yep. You're trying to look out and make sure that I'm not buying a problem.
Yeah.
So those are things that come up as an attorney that necessarily can explain to the client that, again, would be an issue of trying to explain the legal recourse if you were a title company or a lay settlement agent, because they cannot explain what the recourse would be. Lastly, what I'll say is sometimes when it comes to the title like that, or any issues that come up, the buyer will say, well, what are my rights under this contract? Can I cancel the contract? Can I get my deposit back? And again, it kind of goes back to the contract. And so a lot of times all the questions. It may start off as a title question, but it ends up revolving back to the contract, saying, what are my rights and obligations under the contract?
Sure.
And what can I do?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's super helpful as a realtor when the client uses an attorney, because then we have a resource to be able to point them to. Like you said, I mean, I can't pretend to play lawyer. I can't give legal advice. And if there's a title company, it's kind of like, well, now you've got to go retain an attorney and pay more money if you've gotten yourself in a weird situation.
That's right. I mean, because with the settlement agent that's doing the closing, they're going to get their fee just to do that closing. And since they don't have an attorney on staff, and they can't have an attorney, they're not a law firm, then you will pay extra to go to an attorney. But sometimes it's not that easy. It's difficult to just pick up the phone on whatever day in the afternoon, closing's about to happen, maybe it's the next day, and try to find an attorney that's available that wants to consult with you, stop what they're doing to consult with you, to answer your questions when they're not even doing the closing. So it's just difficult. We're all busy, and it's really not fair for us to stop what we're doing with a client who's asked us to do their closing, stop what we're doing for that particular client just to answer a question from a client who chose not to use us for a closing. So it's difficult if you go the route of picking a settlement agent that's a title company and then need legal advice. It's going to be difficult finding an attorney. Not that attorneys are purposely trying to avoid. It's a timing issue.
Yep.
You typically, something comes up, it's an emergency, and trying to get a hold of an attorney that doesn't have the file, doesn't have any information, and trying to give a quick answer like that, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and you've got to prioritize the clients that actually chose to use you from the get-go.
That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. Super cool. Talk to me, what are some of the just words to the wise, things that we can leave people with? What are some of the do's and don'ts, or maybe a better way to say that? What are some of the areas where you see buyers, sellers kind of screw the pooch, things they do, things they don't do that they absolutely should? Like if you could put out a billboard, like my thing is always like, get a survey. Like nobody ever wants to spend the money. It's like the last thing, and they're like, I don't see the value in it. There's already a fence up, but like, give me some examples of some of those things if you can.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you 2 quick ones and then 1 longer one. 2 quick ones are get a survey and, of course, get an owner's title policy. That includes a title search with the title policy.
Yeah.
So with the survey, that's real quick. It's not just, as you said, the fence, but it's boundary lines and anything else. In Virginia, we're a buyer beware state. So if you buy this property, you think the property line is 15 feet off the garage and it's really only 5 feet, you're buying that property. The square footage of the lot or anything like that, it is where it is, the property line. And so you can't then debate it. Well, I thought it was 5 feet over or 10 feet over, and I thought I had a bigger lot. Well, if you didn't get a survey before closing to determine the lines, then you're out of luck. So a survey is really important. You look at it, you make sure everything's good, and you go to closing and you know what you're buying. I totally recommend a survey, and I think that's just one of the smartest things people can do is to get a survey. Yep. That's number 1. Number 2, as I mentioned, title. Get a title policy for all the reasons we talked about a few minutes ago. Protect yourself from what a prior owner could have done to the property. And believe me, I see a lot of stuff out there where prior owners do things or get judgments, and then it does come back to haunt sometimes. So you get a title policy that totally protects you.
And what's the difference there? Because they're going to see there's a lender's title policy, but that's not what we're talking about.
Right. Now, I'm talking about an owner's title policy, and that's a great question. So a lender's title policy is just that. It protects the lender. So if you're getting a loan and the lender incurs a loss because of a title issue, the lender is reimbursed, but not the owner.
Sure.
So it protects only the lender. So if you want to be protected from the same title issue, you have to get your own title policy, an owner's title policy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has to be separate. And people think it's double the money and all that. It really isn't.
It's
once
cheap.
you get the title, and by the way, any closing that has a lender and a lender's title policy, the title search is already done. The lender's policy has been issued, and it's really more of an incremental cost to get the owner's title policy. So you're not paying for another title search or anything like that. You're just paying for basically the difference for that additional coverage. So it's really usually affordable, and it's not, it's a necessary cost, I think.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. And so the third point, which is a little longer, but I think it actually comes back to the contract. I think some buyers in particular try to rush through the process with the real estate agent when it is a matter of, okay, look, just tell me where to sign. They look at the purchase price and they're like, just tell me where else to sign, and they don't really pay attention to the contract. And I think, and despite
you should read contracts.
Yes, you should, because in Virginia, the contract is what controls, right?
Yep.
And so if you don't read the contract, you can't go to the court and say, hey, judge, the reason I didn't do what I was supposed to do, or this is not fair, is I didn't read the contract.
And our
That's not a
contracts
defense.
were very well written by a particular attorney, right?
Our contracts, I think, are pretty well written, yes.
So Mike's too humble to say this, but Mike writes our boilerplate contracts for, that's always my hook, by the way, when I'm like, they're like, who's this Mike Lafayette guy? I'm like, he's the guy that actually writes our contracts that all realtors use. So
Yes. At least in the Richmond market, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but
and they're very clearly written. It's not like lawyer speak. It's not like picking up the King James Bible. Like, it's a very simple. You read through it, and if you've got an 8th grade reading level, you can understand the concepts in that contract.
There's a lot of people that get involved. I mean, I do write the actual. The words, but there are a lot of people involved. There are a lot of realtors who volunteer their time to be in committees and to get things
opinions
like that, and have many of opinions on what should be in the contract. But ultimately, the contract is designed to be very readable, just like you said.
Yeah.
It is 9 pages, but it's very readable, and it does set out everything. So going back to what a client could do, survey title, but also just read the contract. I find that when people call me and they're in a tizzy because something has happened, they don't even know what the contract says. They have not taken a few minutes to read the contract.
Even when a problem is arose.
Yeah. They're just called, what are my rights? What are my obligations? Or what am I stuck? And I'm like, well, it's paragraph 16. And they're like, okay, well, what's paragraph 16 said? I haven't read the contract. And so I think people should take a few minutes and read the contract. I mean, it sounds like basic advice, but you're entering into a pretty large transaction. The contract is very readable. Read the contract, understand. All right, that said I realize some people are not going to take that advice. There's at least 2 paragraphs that I want people to read.
Do people not take your advice either? That even happens to you?
So that's paragraphs 4 and 16.
Okay.
4 is the lender. Fill in the lender information. Don't skip all that. Fill in the lender information. And read paragraph 16. That is the property inspection and repair paragraph of the contract. And that is probably the most important paragraph because it's probably the one where people misunderstand, particularly on the buyer. If I could just say for a minute, what paragraph 16 is about is giving the buyer the right to have the property inspected, right? Yep. And so you can request repairs or repair credit, okay? But it's only of defects. So some people don't read paragraph 16. They see the title heading that says property inspection, and they think, okay, under this paragraph, I'll go in, I'll put an offer, and if I don't like what I see, then I'll use that inspection to ask for the seller to make repairs or, better word, renovations, make changes that are not defects, improvements, right? And that's not what paragraph 16 is about. And that's where I get some phone calls. I get many phone calls each year on that issue where buyer says, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. The seller has said that I'm in default because I asked for these items to be corrected. And I said, okay, well, what did you ask to be corrected? Well, I didn't like the bathtub, the color, I didn't like this, the rug was
wallpaper
faded.
wasn't my style.
Right. And those are what we call cosmetic items. Sure. So all those kind of cosmetic items are not defects defined by the contract, and a purchaser can't ask for those, right? That's not something that's allowed. And so buyers get frustrated when they realize they haven't paid attention to the contract they've submitted. So what they should do is they read paragraph 16 and they understand they can only ask for defects. So if they know that going in, then maybe they'll take a step back and say, okay, this house that was $450,000, there's a lot of cosmetic items that I may need to do. Maybe I should offer $440 because I'm going to have to spend $10,000 on cosmetic, and all the seller's going to be responsible for is fixing the defects. Maybe they make some other type of adjustment.
Sure.
But the point is, if they understood the contract that it's only for defects on paragraph 16, they may make a different decision when it comes to pricing or something else with respect to the contract. So that's why buyers should be a little better educated about the contract and take the time to read through. So that way they make an offer that makes sense, and that way when they're doing the inspection and that is completed, they can then determine or know what they're asking for, which is defects only, and then they won't be frustrated that the seller's coming back and say, yeah, we'll fix defects, but realize nothing else because it's only defects.
Yeah. And it's like, guys, what else are we buying this year for $300,000 or $400,000 or $800,000? Like,
Right.
Take 20 minutes to read the 9-page contract and figure it out and ask questions.
That's
if
exactly
you have it.
right.
Like, yeah.
So people will go out and spend $50 somewhere and read the contract that is put in front of them for a $50 purchase, but yet, like you said, on a several $100,000 purchase, won't take the time to read the contract.
Yeah.
Or they'll research the stock tip and go to Schwab or whatever like that and say, okay, do I want to buy this stock or Amazon stock?
Schwab's a sponsor, by the way. So
Okay.
trade. I'm kidding.
And they'll spend time investing $2,000 in stock, half hour just whether or not to invest or anything like that, and they're not taking time. The point is, it's a very big purchase. They should take the time. They read the contract. So that'd be my third point. Is read the contract, because so many questions I get really involve people who have not taken the time to read the contract.
Yeah, a lot of pain could be avoided just by doing that. So, and make sure your real estate agent has read the contract.
Oh, well, I know you have read the real estate contract, because when I get your emails on clients and say, hey, on this paragraph, you'll quote the paragraph and recite it. So everyone listening understand that Chris knows the contract very well.
Chapter and verse. Thank you,
Yes,
sir. Yeah.
yes.
Well, Mike,
but I'll be happy to quiz you. Do we have time that I could quiz you just to make sure you?
We're going to edit this out. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, let's do it. If I get anything wrong, we'll just cut the segment.
Okay.
So.
All right.
So what we're going to do now we're going to turn to our Facebook and Instagram accounts. We're going to we put out a request to see what questions the general populace had.
Okay.
So we're gonna have Maddie ask those questions of us and go into the fire round. All right. So our Cameo guest, Miss Madison Wright, is sitting in just because the jobs I've given her don't fulfill her legal.
This is my one source of what is it? Serotonin? Is that the happy hormone?
Dopamine, one of the two.
Oh, whatever. That one source of. All
right. So other than the 4 questions you have personally, what questions does we get from the social mediums?
So if you personally were buying a house, could you, since you're an attorney, take care of it / kind of represent yourself, or would you have to have a separate entity do it?
So we can actually take care of it ourselves. But there are some lenders, however, have policies that an attorney who's the client cannot represent themselves. So sometimes it's lender driven. But I have done closings for myself, and the lender was okay with it. But it's really going to be lender driven.
Interesting.
Does your litigation background start creeping out whenever you represent yourself?
Yeah.
Would it be tough to represent yourself since you're like emotionally involved?
No, I don't think it is. For me, a transaction it's what's the paper, and I try. In fact, that's a great question of something we didn't touch on, which is one of the things I always try to do as a closing attorney is to lower the drama and to try to take some of the emotions out of it. So when there is a problem, we're talking about the facts or the data or the specific provisions or what happened or what should happen, and just try to reduce the drama. I think an attorney or anyone who doesn't try to do that is not serving their client well, and there's so many emotions that may be involved in a purchase, and sometimes reducing the drama is the best thing you can do, and then give the answer.
Diffuse the situation.
Yes.
Makes sense. Okay. What do you do if the owner on title is different than the person trying to sell?
Ooh.
So we deal with that all the time, like people whose like parents have passed away that are selling the house, and like, so how would you handle that?
Yeah, so what happens is the title search will show what the title is in. Typically what happens in that kind of case where someone has passed away, for instance, Mr. and Mrs. Smith died, and then Junior is the owner of the property or believes he's the owner of the property, 2 things will come up there. One is he is actually the owner and he just hasn't gone through the probate. Or, this comes up from time to time, Junior is not the sole owner. He actually has siblings. He thinks he's the owner, but he's not. And so that has to go through probate. So it all comes down to we have to find out whether or not Mr. and Mrs. Smith had a will. And if they had a will, then the will will control, and that will determine who the beneficiaries or who the owners are. If they did not have a will, then Virginia has a law called intestacy, and that will determine who the owners are. I will tell you, this has come up for me in my practice several times where the person saying that they are the owner of the property is not, and that their siblings were also owners, and whether they were doing it to try to make money for themselves or were trying to, take advantage of the situation or just did not understand the situation. I'm trying to be kind, but that has happened. So let me just tell you from a real estate perspective or a real estate attorney or a real estate agent, when someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm the owner of this property and it does not show that on title, one of the first things to do is to contact an attorney to help that particular seller and to get a title search done or to do anything that needs to be done on a probate because they will not have the authority to sign off on things if title has not been changed. So that's an important thing that has to be done.
Yeah, we learned that lesson last year. We had a seller client that represented themselves as the executor of the estate. Find out it was actually willed down to them and their other sibling, and then they were using a title company to save $25. And you dodged a bullet on that one because that wasn't a fun one to.
No, it wasn't. So, we dealt with that exact situation as you're recanting, and I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, and
sounds
so
familiar.
It does come up, and then they definitely need an attorney for that situation because also helping with the probate, whatever documents have to be done for probate. And if you get and if someone's listening out there who's a seller, thinking about selling, and they're in this situation, their mom and dad has died or whoever, and they are the beneficiaries and they haven't done anything, they really need to call you and then tell you that and say, hey, here's the situation. So that way it can be worked out from both the attorney perspective before you list the property for sale. Because if you try to list the property for sale and the contract comes in and the title search is done, it's going to all be put on hold. You'll likely lose that buyer.
Yep.
There's a lot of things that can go on. So it's best to clean it up first, get the probate done, and then move it to, put it for sale.
Yep.
Okay. Do you ever deal with foreclosures or just closings?
So I have done foreclosures in the past for clients who have been owed money. I don't represent banks, but I have represented individuals who have lent money, seller financing, and we've had to foreclose. So I've done some foreclosures.
Those aren't fun.
They're not fun. Luckily, the several I've done, I've only probably done about half dozen in my years. They were ones that did not have a sad story. They were properties that were bought and the owners did not pay the money, and I think most of them, if not all of them, were rental properties. So, we weren't putting any kids out on the street or anything like that, and the money certainly was not paid. So, that part of it was not a problem. As far as from the closing point of view, I will do closings where our clients are buying properties from a foreclosure, and those are ones that also raise issues because a lot of times when something's at foreclosure, there could be other judgments or liens out there. And so when you buy in foreclosure, you have to be very, very mindful that you're not getting clear title.
No, sir.
Oftentimes you're not, and what looks like a great deal is not a great deal when you have to spend money clearing up to make sure that you have clear title.
When you find there's $100,000 judgment against the property,
people think foreclosure is the way to buy property. You should only get into buying a foreclosure property if you're sophisticated enough to understand the pitfalls that come with it. And if you're a first-time home buyer and all that, that is not the type of property you should be buying. You should be calling Chris and going through buying a house through the normal process because there's too much risk as a first-time home buyer to try to buy at a foreclosure sale.
Even if they bought the infomercial package?
Even if they bought the infomercial, they should throw it away. They should throw it away.
We'll just have you on another whole podcast about foreclosures.
This episode sponsored by.
Yeah.
We buy ugly houses. So going back to kind of how you were talking about how you don't play real estate agent and like real estate agent shouldn't play attorney. So since our contracts are fill in the blank written by you, can realtors, since they have the experience working with those contract items, can they kind of explain the buyer's or seller's role in that contract based on
what are the limitations of what an agent can explain and not explain?
Yeah, so that's a
more,
great question. So
a better way to say that.
Yeah, so a real estate agent can explain the contract.
Yeah.
And certainly can fill in the terms of the contract, can make changes to the contract. And what I tell agents is that what they should not do is go beyond their scope of experience.
Sure.
So if it's just something like changing the paragraph to say, hey, from 14 days to 10 days or anything like that, that's simple. If it is to change who gets the deposit, if it's to expand on perhaps the definition of of defects where you say, okay, well, we're crossing off cosmetic. We want cosmetic to be included in defects. Then you're starting to get into an area that is, well, what is the ramification of changing definitions? So I kind of rambled on there, but I would be very careful in saying you can make any changes to the contract. For instance, there are a couple paragraphs that can't be changed. Paragraphs 13 and 14, or 12 and 13. I'm sorry, I don't have those numbers memorized, but the Property Owners Association and Condo Owner Associations, those paragraphs cannot change.
State law.
That's state law. So you cannot change those. I think it's 13 and 14. They just cannot change. So you can make changes, but you just have to be mindful. And so I know, like on the contracts you write, Chris, they're thought out. If there's any changes, it's very clear. I've received some contracts on my desk that are not very clear. Well, because I think you're making sure that everything is right for your client, and that's important. And I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think you did all those things for your clients well. So
plus the check we offered.
Well, that's true. Yes, that check, and yes, I can do a lot with that check. And we're just joking, obviously. All right, but that's the thing about contracts is you shouldn't go beyond the scope of where you feel comfortable making changes. So the answer is yes, you can make changes, but don't go beyond the scope of where you feel comfortable writing something that you're not comfortable writing.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Is it defaulting on the contract to ask for cosmetic issues, or is it just you can't do that?
Yeah. So paragraph 16 says you can request for a repair of defects or a credit for defects, and excluded from that definition of defects are cosmetic items. If you put a repair request in, and on that repair request to me, on there clearly shows cosmetic items to me, that is a default. You have done something you're not permitted under the terms of contract to do. I think other attorneys would agree with me. Some others would not. I think that's a debatable item, but it's clearly something that we all agree on. It shouldn't be done. Cosmetic is excluded and should not be done under any circumstance under paragraph 16. Whether or not it's a default, perhaps that's debatable, but it should not be done. So that's just one of the clear things. Again, I go back to the buyer's understanding the contract, that paragraph 16, it's about defects. It's not about cosmetic items. It's not about renovations or improvements, things like that you mentioned. It's about defects only.
Sure.
Okay. Do clients ever consult you also in addition to their real estate agent before making offers to get legal advice going into that process?
Yes. Sometimes I have clients that have been with me a long time, and it's no disrespect to the real estate agent, but just because I have helped them on a lot of different closings, and they'll just ask for a second opinion or just ask to review the contract. And so I have a good working relationship with agent, and so Chris may have someone that say, hey, Chris, would you please send this over to Mike Lafayette? I just want him to review, and Chris will just email it, and then I review it very quickly, and I say, yeah, everything's fine, everything's completed, and go ahead and sign. And it's usually something that's done very quickly. Typically, it's someone will ask me typically to review a contract. It's not necessarily usually it's where they don't know the agent. Yeah. Sometimes it's it may be the listing agent. Sometimes the listing agent has just filled out the contract. Sure. Or Chris, you may be the listing agent, and the buyer says, "Oh, I don't have a buyer's agent, but so therefore I just want an attorney to take a look at it." Not too often do I get contracts where the agent and the client know each other well in the agent's experience. That does not come up very often.
Yeah. So can a client, like if they went with a title company, could they switch to you at any time during the process, or are they kind of bound?
Legally, there's nothing stopping a client from switching from a title company to an attorney, but the timing is an issue where we can help them. There comes a point in time where where we really can't. If it's the last minute, if closing is supposed to be next week and they want to switch at the last minute, closing will be delayed. We can order the title search, we can get, and put a rush on it. But right now, title searches are running, 1 to 2 weeks for a title company to get those completed. Then we'd have to communicate with the lender and, get everything up and going. So it'd be a real rush. So if they did a last minute change, that would be problematic, not just with me, with any attorney. I mean, you just, physically you need enough time to do the job you need to do to get it done. And if someone waits till last minute, then it's not going to be good for them. And the answer is probably going to be no, we can't help you.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap up the fire round. I've got a question. You've been doing this a long time. what's the craziest, leaving names and addresses out, what's the craziest story you've ever, or what's the craziest transaction you've ever encountered?
Well, when it comes to crazy, and you can see I'm hesitating, there's different levels of crazy. Probably the one where...
Not like ex-girlfriend crazy.
No.
Yeah.
I had a client that, that just kind of flipped out at closing, had an emotional breakdown. That was very interesting. I heard words that I haven't heard.
Is that the dent in the wall?
Yeah. So I had that happen. I've only had one of those.
Sure.
But yeah, I had literally an emotional... That was sad, but it was just something you don't see, and I had never seen before, and a total breakdown. So that was unfortunate, but that was really strange. But the other things, probably anything else, it's, I'm seeing this more and more, but it drives me crazy. Clients, and it's really not a big deal, but it is when it comes to closing. Clients bringing their kids in and their McDonald's and their toys and their dog, and I've had that like last year twice where the clients come in and they bring their kids and their McDonald's and the dog, and and I'm like, it makes it very hard sitting around the table trying to explain when
once again a $400,000 purchase.
Yes, when the dog's running around, the kids or whatever, and they're throwing French fries or whatever like that, and you're trying to be, and it's not about the professionalism. It's just I want to make sure they understand what they're signing, and it takes away from all that. And not that kids are not invited, of course they are, but I mean, but the lunches and the dog, and I mean, this is, you need to take it seriously. I mean, you're signing for this purchase, and you need to take it seriously. So those are kind of the. So they're not crazy, but they're just things that seem to be developing with folks lowering the threshold, let's just say, of what is expected at a closing.
Yeah.
So
leave the dog at home.
Yeah.
Mike Lafayette is very pro dog, but leave the dog at home for closing.
There's nothing wrong with pets, and there's nothing wrong with eating, and there's nothing wrong with kids. But when you combine it all with the closing, it
kind of makes a mess.
It makes a mess.
Yeah, just leave the kids at home. Let
Catch
the dog
up on
watch
the closing
kids.
documents are not good. I mean, it's just not. I mean, the lender. I mean, they have to go to the courthouse, and in all seriousness, documents can be rejected at the courthouse, the mortgage and all that. So if there's stains on them or anything like that, they can be rejected. So
that's awkward.
Yeah. So
especially after you move.
Yeah,
in.
it's like, excuse me, you have to re-sign that. You have to catch up on it. I mean, so anyway.
Well, that's going to wrap up the show. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Michael, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Chris.
Appreciate you having out. Appreciate all the insights. And we will see you guys on the next episode.
Great.
Thanks for joining us for the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show. If you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please contact Chris Elliott at chris@chriselliottrealestate.com or by phone at 804-980-1898. And please join us again next time for the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show.